film industry has been decimated by other countries taking them out, and also by incompetence.
Everyone in the United States of America has a responsibility to follow the Constitution. That includes you, Donald Trump.
There are people in this world who really are escaping fear and persecution from the homeland, but they're sitting in the back seat too because millions of people cheated the system.
Hello and happy Monday. I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, tariffs and popcorn. President Trump claims the film industry is, quote, decimated. His idea to fix it, 100% levies on foreign-made films. MAGA mantle. The president says he's not thinking about going for an unconstitutional third term. Instead, he named Czech Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance in that order as possible future leaders of his movement. Debt due. The Education Department resumes collecting on school loans, what this means for millions of borrowers who've fallen behind on their payments. And later this hour, immigration conversation. Our very own Adria Garrett speaks with Arizona Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego at the Sedona Forum out in the Grand Canyon State, what the lawmakers telling him about the White House's border policies. But let's start tonight with Robert Costa here with me at the CBS Washington Bureau and Aaron Navarro at the White House. Aaron, good to see you. We'll begin there because the president had a lot to say about his idea for movie tariffs. Let's take a listen.
Film industry has been decimated by other countries taking them out, and also by incompetence, like in Los Angeles. The governor is a grossly incompetent man. He's just allowed it to be taken away from, Hollywood. Hollywood doesn't do very much.
Flanked there by the NFL commissioner and the mayor of Washington. We'll get into that later. Aaron, what are they saying over at the White House about what this might entail?
Ed, good to be with you. During that Oval Office meeting, President Trump said himself he will be meeting with film industry executives as they maybe take a step back from the 100% tariffs he announced on Sunday. And that's because, in part, the White House, an official said that no final decisions have been made. CBS News has reached out to the U.S. Trade Representative and Commerce Department, who President Trump said would be leading this effort. They have not responded to questions for more details. There are still outstanding questions on if this tariff would apply to TV production outside the U.S. Would this apply to American-produced films that are shot outside the U.S., such as the upcoming Mission Impossible movie, and how it will be applied? Will it be based on box office revenue or production costs? But we are starting to get some interesting reactions, particularly from unions in support of just this incentive to bring film production back to the U.S. The SAG-AFTRA union, representing artists and more, supported this effort to increase movie production inside the United States. The Teamsters union said in a statement this afternoon they thanked President Trump and said, quote, it's a strong step towards finally reining in studios' un-American addiction to outsourcing our members' work. And California Governor Gavin Newsom, who said in the statement that they're waiting for more details before they officially comment on these film tariffs, pointed out how he is working to get film and TV production back inside California with their own tax credits.
Yeah, but obviously they're not doing enough because places like Atlanta, Vancouver, Toronto, even Romania now are popular places to film. What are they saying over there today, Aaron, about the president saying he doesn't know if he needs to uphold the Constitution?
Yeah, this is a striking comment from him made from his NBC interview where, just some context, President Trump was asked if everyone in the U.S. is entitled to due process, including undocumented migrants, something spelled out in the Fifth Amendment. He said, I don't know, punted to his lawyers that work for him, said they are going to, quote, obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. This is in the context of the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the El Salvadorian man in Maryland who the Trump administration said they mistakenly deported to El Salvador due to a, quote, administrative error.
Bob, this I don't know came in the midst of a litany of questions about the Abrego Garcia case, and there's some, if you watch it, suggesting that maybe he was I don't knowing the Abrego Garcia situation and not the idea that he has to uphold his oath to the Constitution. But what do you make of this? This sort of strikes at the heart of everything his critics have been worried about with him.
It also reflects how he operates. My sources close to President Trump, Ed, say they're continuing to keep an eye on the Supreme Court and in terms of exactly what it orders the administration to do. And they're trying to see if there's a gray area in terms of following a Supreme Court or federal court order. If there is a gray area, they're going to stay in it as long as possible.
You had a conversation for CBS Sunday Morning with Larry Summers, the president of Harvard, which, of course, is now in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. And he had a lot to say about what exactly is going on there. Let's take a listen to some of that interview.
If Harvard, America's richest university, America's university that had produced the most presidents, if Harvard couldn't stand up, nobody else could.
What's President Trump's endgame with Harvard?
I think his endgame is to try to get the university to bend the knee.
And what else did he tell you about the administration's actions against Harvard and about universities writ large?
Larry Summers was Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration, then served as Harvard's president. He's now a professor at Harvard. And his comments reflect what Harvard's president, President Garber, has said in recent days, that they're going to try to defy the administration as they pressure Harvard and other universities to adjust their policies on diversity, admissions, curriculum, how anti-Semitism is handled on campus. Summers was pretty tough in his language. He called it, in his view, extortion for federal grants to be frozen unless Harvard acts in the way President Trump wants it to act. And you saw him last week reference Harvard in his speech at the University of Alabama. He said the future will be written not by the Harvard Crimson, but the Crimson Tide. This is a cultural battle, a political battle, an economic battle.
And notably, Summers and the current president of Harvard both concede the concerns about anti-Semitism or about political imbalance have to be addressed, but not necessarily in this way.
Broadly speaking,
right.
They have both made comments that Harvard has work to do when it comes to handling anti-Semitism on campus. And Summers was blunt. He said that Harvard has made mistakes in the past, not only in terms of how it's handled anti-Semitism, but in terms of the ideological diversity on campus.
All righty. Robert Costa here in D.C. Aaron Navarro over at the White House. Thank you both. And speaking of education, for the first time since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the federal government will start collecting again from people who owe. According to the Education Department, 42.7 million borrowers owe more than $1.6 trillion in student debt. Only 38% of borrowers are currently making payments. Let's bring in Washington Post national higher education reporter Danielle Douglas-Gabriel. Danielle, great to see you. Today is just day one of this attempt to have people start paying back. What can you tell us about how it's gone so far? There must have been borrowers waking up this morning realizing they now owe big.
So, I mean, this is a very specific subset of borrowers. We're talking involuntary collection. This is for folks who are in default on their student loans, and that's about 5 million people. Starting today, about 195,000 of those people received a notice from the Treasury Department saying, if you don't make payments, we're going to start seizing tax refunds, seizing Social Security benefits, and later this summer, garnishing your wages. And by the summer, you could see all 5.3 million people who are in default seeing their wages garnished. So there are a lot of steps here that folks can take to avoid those sorts of consequences. And I think the department is really trying to hammer home that, you know, call your student loan servicer, log in to see whether or not you're delinquent or in default, and figure out what the best payment option is for you.
And one of the ironies is the president is actively pushing to have the Education Department shut down. But what exactly is it doing, the department, to start collecting these payments?
So the department is working with its loan servicers, which are effectively contractors that manage the portfolio for the department. And they're really the first point of contact for a lot of borrowers. Companies like Nelnet and Mohila are the ones that are probably sending the letters and the notices telling borrowers, hey, you need to start paying, you're behind by either 60 days, 90 days. And, you know, it's time for you to figure out a plan. Now, where this can get complicated is for borrowers who need help. After reaching out to their servicers, if they're unable to get someone, they tend to reach out to the department. The department's federal student aid office has been decimated. So I anticipate, and many people I've spoken to anticipate longer hours in terms of trying to reach somebody. Call centers are just not staffed the way that they used to be. And that's going to create some problems as people are trying to figure out what's the next plan.
Already going to make a rough Monday even worse if they can't get someone on the phone today. You've been covering Republicans eyeing massive reforms to student loan debt and to Pell Grants. What do they have in mind going forward?
I mean, we're looking at a really slimmed down federal student loan system if Republicans are successful with the reconciliation bill that we've seen last week. And this would be whittling down all of the repayment plans down to 2, cutting eligibility for Pell Grant, especially hitting people who are part-time students, a lot of community college students, older students who may only be able to afford to take one class at a time. They could lose the maximum eligibility for a Pell, so that would be a big change there. A lot of the lending programs for parents would be remarkably reduced, as well as the end of graduate plus lending for grad students. That would change, and we'd also see caps on how much people can borrow. It very much is important to note that some of these reforms are things that have been pushed in a bipartisan manner in the past, but the level and the extreme nature of some of these reforms, I think, are worrying a lot of people about reducing access and eligibility for college and higher education.
Well, we'll see where this goes. You make a good point here. It's about 5 million people, you said, who are in default overall. About 195,000 of them got notice today to start paying up or watch wages and tax refunds get garnished, right?
Yes, or in Social Security benefits.
Yeah.
I think the big part that we have to pay attention to is there are about 4 million people who are 90 days past due on their loans. If they are unable to make a payment plan, they can also end up in default and face all of the consequences of wage garnishment, Social Security benefits, as well as tax refund being seized or withheld.
And it creates an unprecedented, never before seen kind of economic crisis for millions of people. We'll see. Danielle, thank you so much for covering that with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All righty. Also today overseas, Israel's government approved plans to capture all of the Gaza Strip. The country's army is calling up tens of thousands of reserve soldiers. Our MTS tie-up has the latest.
Well, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it clear Israel's plan is now to capture all of the Gaza Strip, and that this offensive will be, in his words, intensive, and that Israeli troops will remain in the devastated Palestinian territory for an unspecified length of time. Now, Netanyahu also said the Israeli military's previous strategy of carrying out raids and then abandoning territory it once held will now be, in his words, the opposite. Israeli government ministers unanimously approved these plans for the new offensive just today. Only hours earlier, it was announced that tens of thousands of reserve soldiers are being called up. Now, despite 19 months of brutal violence in Gaza, the Israeli military has so far failed to achieve its goal of destroying Hamas or returning all the hostages. And critics within Israel say the new plan will achieve neither of those goals. Now, the situation in Gaza is already catastrophic, and this will only make things that much worse. We have to remember, for 2 months now, Israel has already prevented all food, water, and medicine from entering Gaza. It's already being described as the biggest humanitarian crisis the Palestinian territory has ever seen. Now, speaking to reporters at the White House, President Trump did not offer his views on Israel's plan to expand operations in Gaza, but instead blamed Hamas for having treated the people of Gaza, quote, very badly. The president, however, did say the U.S. will, and again, I'm quoting here, help the people of Gaza get some food. Now, Trump's comments come as he is expected to visit Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar next week, something Israel sees as a window of opportunity for a hostage deal in Gaza. Israel is reportedly trying to leverage the U.S. president's trip to the Middle East to push Hamas to accept a deal, with the Israeli military reporting that Netanyahu will launch that massive ground operation if no deal is reached. Back to you.
MTS tie-up for us tonight in London. Thank you. A big name down in Georgia bows out of a potentially huge political contest. Next, our political panel weighs in on what this means for Democrats' attempts to retake the U.S. Senate. Stay with us. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who's long seen as the Republican favorite to challenge Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff, has decided to stay on the sidelines in 2026, at least when it comes to the big Senate race. Governor Kemp wrote on social media in part, quote, I spoke with President Trump and Senate leadership earlier today and expressed my commitment to work alongside them to ensure we have a strong Republican nominee who can win next November. The Ossoff campaign released a statement of its own saying in part, quote, as we've said for the past few months, Senator Ossoff is well prepared to defeat any challenger. Let's bring in our reporter panel. Braxton Booker is a national political correspondent for Politico. Kadia Goba is a political reporter for Semaphore. If you like your news in yellow, you should check out Semaphore. The reason we care, of course, about the Georgia Senate race is because John Ossoff is the only Democrat running in a state that Joe Biden lost. President Trump won in 2024, so Republicans think it's a prime pickup opportunity. But Kemp's decision today kind of takes the air out of the balloon, at least for Republicans for now, right, guys?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I will tell you that, you know, in my reporting and talking with folks in and around the Ossoff camp, they were certainly planning for a Kemp Ossoff matchup, and that was seen as the most formidable challenger for Ossoff to retain his seat. With him out the way, this seems to be open up a much larger lane for him to keep his seat. Now, obviously, in the statement saying he's not going to take anybody for granted who steps up and runs against him, but the path back to Washington seems a lot easier for him at this point.
There was some polling last week, right, that put him ahead of every Republican challenger, potential Republican challenger, except Governor Kemp.
Exactly.
So that's part of what gives Democrats relief today, is that this might have become a slightly easier, less expensive contest.
But also, even talking to Democrats in Georgia today, they said, look, if it shows that Republicans in Georgia are not feeling very confident if President Trump was relying on Brian Kemp to help secure the Senate majority for Republicans. And with him out the way, it certainly bodes well for Democrats, and it shows that MAGA is not as strong. At least that's what one operative said. MAGA is not as strong as folks would like folks to believe it is in the state of Georgia right now.
Which, of course, is one of those southern purple states as the population shifts around. Who on earth is there then for Republicans, if not Brian Kemp?
Yeah, with Kemp out of the way, I agree. Ossoff definitely has a path to re-election. Obviously, there's chatter around Collins running for, I think he put out a statement already, and also a very popular Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, there's no, she hasn't released a statement yet that I've heard of, and I'm sure we'll all be corralling around her in about an hour on the Hill. But it's uncertain whether or not she could win a general election.
Yeah.
She's certainly probably going to be the favorite if she does jump in terms of a primary.
She's from North Georgia, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but she's
that's
going to bring
a very
the cameras
Republican. She's going
to bring the cameras to that race for sure.
Sure, and that's the money. And of course, it's Secretary Collins of Veterans Affairs, who's a former Georgia congressman. That's who you're talking about when you say Collins.
Representative Collins, sorry.
That one, okay.
Yeah.
And then Buddy Carter was another one, right?
And Buddy Carter as well.
Okay, so they have some options.
They do.
But none of them is well known. None of them is proven as Governor Kemp, who also, by the way, is maybe still thinking about running for president in 2028.
Well, I mean, you cannot rule that out. With Trump out the way, perhaps, in 2028, that also clears a path of someone not in MAGA world running for that lane for moderate Republicans.
Speaking of governors thinking of running in 2028, you talked to another one of them, Maryland Governor, Democrat Wes Moore, right?
I did. And of course, you know, he goes on The View. He also tells me that he's not running in 2028. He's been very specific about not running for president.
I am not running.
I am not running.
Okay. Which is literally true.
It is a factual statement as we are sitting here right now, today. He is running in 2026 for re-election. He will not talk about his plans beyond that. He's also gotten, or will most likely get, a challenger for his gubernatorial seat in Maryland. So I think the outlook for Wes Moore is really bright for him to win re-election. But he is laying the groundwork for a presidential run. He just will not admit that clearly right now, as he was just in Pennsylvania yesterday, giving a commencement speech at a historical black college where he's discussing in great detail about patriotism and what that means for up-and-coming black graduates. And later this month, he's going to be down in South Carolina, which, you know, nobody's making any connections to South Carolina being an early primary state, the state that launched Joe Biden into to the presidency, where he's going to be talking at a South Carolina dinner with Democrats. So he's the keynote speaker.
And then goes to the Jim Clyburn fish fry. I mean, nobody goes to the Jim Clyburn fish fry on purpose. Right. I don't know if you've been. The fish is decent, but the location is obscure, and you have to have a good reason to be going there. With all due respect to the leader.
Exactly. One Democrat told me, like, look, you don't go down to the fish fry if you're not really considering running for president at some point.
But then, notably, Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego, who we're going to hear from a little later in the hour, was is now going this Saturday to Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which you have to win if you want to win Pennsylvania in any realm. This is his first trip that looks somewhat suspicious.
Yeah, a lot of Democrats have been speculating that Gallego would be a candidate for the presidential election. And this started all the way when he voted in favor of the Lincoln-Riley Act at the beginning of the congressional term. But also his trip to Pennsylvania, Bucks County is Trump just flipped it. It is one of those Biden, it's one of those flippable.
Yeah, Biden to Trump areas of the state.
Exactly. There are lawmakers, one of the most moderate lawmakers on the Hill right now, Fitzpatrick. And also last week I reported on Gallego sort of lauding an initiative by the Trump, in the Trump administration that would essentially turn public lands into rentals, or you could giving permission to like sell public lands to create more housing. Now, this is quite strategic when a reporter ends up with a letter to the administration, you know, congratulating Burgum and Turner. Now, obviously, his position is that he wants to make sure, you know, a rich guy doesn't own 50 miles or 50 acres of land in Arizona. However, in this administration, when a Democrat is lauding an initiative from Trump, has to suggest something.
Yeah, and he's positioned himself as a moderate possibility.
And he did that on the trail, to be honest, in 2024.
Exactly. That's how he won in there. He understands you gotta moderate your position. Yeah. It is awfully early to be talking about all this.
It's a little early, but I mean, he's got time. He just got to the Senate, and he won by saying that he was a fighter, but also engaging with a lot of Latinos in Arizona by doing some politically unorthodox things. He would hold like events where they would watch boxing matches. So he is testing out this idea that I am a different candidate and I'm going to run differently. And look, even months into my first Senate term, I'm going to Pennsylvania to sell that message to help my party.
And the presidential race is before the Senate race.
I was about to say he's one of those few who has the benefit of waiting 2 more years and can do this during his first full Senate term. Kadia Goba of Semaphore, Braxton Booker of Politico. Good to have you both back. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Are Trump supporters having buyer's remorse? Well, that guy we were just talking about, Ruben Gallego, says yes, particularly among one key constituency. You will hear from the senator coming up as he speaks with our Major Garrett. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The Trump administration's cut deals with several countries here in the Western Hemisphere to take in and detain immigrants deported from the United States. But it's now also seeking to send migrants to countries on the other end of the world. CBS News has confirmed the White House is working to broker deportation agreements with several countries in the Eastern Hemisphere, including Angola and Equatorial Guinea. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez joins us now. Good to see you, sir. What else do we know about these talks with these quite far-off countries?
Well, Ed, this is part of a broader and intense diplomatic campaign by the Trump administration to convince and persuade as many nations as possible, regardless of their human rights records and the conditions there, to accept third country nationals, migrants from home countries who refuse or reject U.S. deportations of their citizens, including Venezuelans. And we understand that the administration has been talking to several countries in Africa and Europe, including the ones that you named, as part of this push to convince countries to take in as many migrants as possible. There are a lot of questions about how these migrants would be treated, what sort of legal process they would be afforded, and also how much money these countries would be paid by the U.S. to accept these deportations of citizens, again, who are not their own. And so there are many questions still that we have to investigate, but we do know that the administration has confirmed publicly, Ed, that they are actively searching for countries to deport migrants who right now cannot be deported to their home countries.
What's another country besides Venezuela that isn't accepting migrants back?
Well, Cuba, for example, limits deportations.
Okay.
There are countries like Nicaragua also that limit deportations, and countries that are in Africa but do not accept U.S. deportations as well.
So we could conceivably see Venezuelans and Cubans sent to somewhere like Angola or Equatorial Guinea?
Well, it's unclear right now because these agreements have not been announced or finalized, but there is actually one proposal, according to the documents that we obtained, under consideration that would allow the U.S. to use these deportation agreements to deport suspected members of Tren de Aragua. As you know, that is the notorious Venezuelan prison gang. As you know, the U.S. already sent nearly 300 suspected TDA members to El Salvador, which has imprisoned them there at that infamous, notorious mega prison.
I got to ask you about something the Trump administration also announced today. It says it's going to offer immigrants living illegally in the United States free airline tickets and a $1,000 incentive to self-deport. The border czar, Tom Homan, had this to say about it today. Take a listen.
You'll have some movement, right? Because I think people are finally getting the message. If you leave on your own, you can take advantage of legal programs. Come back as a worker, a tourist visa, a visitor's visa, a student visa, or have a U.S. citizen child if you have one. Petition for you in the future. Leave yourself open to the opportunity of legal entry. Do things the right way.
The president also said today his administration is going to get migrants, quote, a beautiful flight back to where they came from. In our remaining 45 seconds, Camilo, what else should we know about this apparent initiative?
Well, at recognizing that ICE does not have the manpower or the resources to identify, arrest, detain, and deport everyone who is here illegally, the administration has been pushing for self-deportations. They are now instructing migrants who are here in the country illegally to use a smartphone app known as CBP Home now to sign up to register for self-deportation, to tell the government they intend to depart the country voluntarily, and to request travel assistance in the form of a free plane ticket to be sent back home. And after that self-deportation is confirmed by U.S. officials, they will be eligible for $1,000 in a stipend. So this, again, is a carrot that the administration is employing alongside its sticks to push for self-deportations, Ed.
Okay, but reality check here. All the immigration attorneys and experts you talk to, have you heard of anyone who has logged into that app and admitted they're here illegally and announced plans to self-deport through that app?
Well, that is still an open question. We're trying to get as many data sets and numbers from the government as possible. But according to the Department of Homeland Security, thousands of migrants have already self-deported under this administration.
Fascinating. All right. Camilo Montoya Galvez. When it comes to immigration, we call him. We're glad you were here today. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Thanks, Ed.
All righty. Keeping on the subject, there's a new piece in the Washington Post detailing growing concerns over children's rights being violated by the Trump administration's deportations. The report documents the plight of a woman deported to Venezuela last week who'd been separated from her husband and their 2-year-old daughter. The toddler's now living with her third foster family here in the U.S., while their father is being detained at that mega prison in El Salvador they call Secot. The Trump administration told the Washington Post the child wasn't deported with her mother for the sake of her own, quote, safety and welfare. Investigative reporter for the Washington Post, Sylvia Foster-Frau, is here with me in Washington. It is great to see you. It's been a while since we did this, so it's fun to talk about this, and an incredible report that you and your colleagues prepared. The Trump administration is alleging that the father of this child's connected to the Tren de Aragua gang that Camila just mentioned. Is there evidence of that in this case? And how does it explain that the child's been separated from her mother?
Yeah, so the Trump administration has said both the father and mother are both involved in criminal activity. The father, a lieutenant in Tren de Aragua, and they have not provided proof or evidence either to the lawyers or to the Washington Post when we put in the request. So all we have is the public statement that the Trump administration made. And then from there, you know, they took the father and sent him to the mega prison in El Salvador. And the mother just recently was deported without her child. As you mentioned, they said it was for her safety and well-being, although the child's advocate, the Young Center that supports migrant children, had made a recommendation. They looked at the family and basically said, we recommend that this child be reunited with her mother before she gets deported back to Venezuela, but that didn't happen.
And there's no explanation as to why staying with a foster family in the United States is better for the well-being of this child than going with her mother, even if it means going back to Venezuela.
There's no explanation other than that allegation. And what's been really hard in this administration is that there has not been evidence or proof for a lot of these cases of allegations of Tren de Aragua affiliation. So you just have the government's word with nothing backing it up. I reviewed records from Venezuela that showed that the parents didn't have a criminal record there. They were detained as soon as they entered the United States, so there wasn't even an opportunity to commit a crime if they wanted to there. And so you're just kind of left wondering, there's this child that has no immigration status, that's being held in federal custody, is on their third foster family now, and there's no end in sight. The child's lawyers are just trying to figure out what to do now.
Yeah, and whether she could ever get home. So it's like you got to get her home to Venezuela. There's the push to get Abrego Garcia back here to the United States to at least have his due process rights fulfilled. And you and your colleagues also put together this incredible report about the sort of 48 hours around the time that these initial deportations happened to El Salvador, the more than 200 Venezuelans that were sent to El Salvador back in March. What to you was the most surprising thing uncovered by this reporting? And give us a sense of how messy, how chaotic this all really was.
Yeah, so there were two things that really stood out to me. One was when we discovered that there were people who were State Department vetted refugees that had been sent to the Salvadoran mega prison. These are people who went through extensive background checks. They did a year-long application process from outside the U.S. They gave fingerprints. They met in person with authorities. They gave references to family members and previous employers, all so that they could come here as refugees in America. And they were sent to the Salvadoran prison along with, a couple hundred others. So that was really shocking to me. We also found TPS holders, same kind of thing. They're supposed to have this temporary protected status that protects them from removal. And they were, complying legally with these immigration records, and they were sent to. And I think the other thing that was surprising was in this entire operation, just learning some of the details about how it all came about and just how rushed and kind of secretive the entire operation was. So I'll just throw like one detail at you, which was when they sent the airplanes on March 15th, when they were headed to El Salvador, they stopped in Honduras, and there was always a question of why they had stopped there.
You did answer this question. It's fascinating.
Yes, and so what it turned out is that they were so rushed to get these planes out that the Salvadoran government was not ready for them and wanted the commercial flights and airlines to be closed in their airport in El Salvador first. And so those airplanes waited for 4 hours in the Honduran airport, which is only a 30-minute flight to the Salvadoran airport, and waited there for over 4 hours until the commercial flights in El Salvador were closed, the airport was dead, and then they brought in
And the Hondurans were okay with them landing?
I guess so. I mean,
that was what I found interesting, because it drags them into it. And then it also clears the airport so that they could shoot that incredible propaganda video of all of those detainees being rushed off to the prison.
Right. So that part was interesting because some of the officials that we spoke with talked about how Honduras is often a stopping place for actual deportations to Venezuela.
Yeah.
And so that part seemed almost normal, like, oh, they're stopping here to refuel to go all the way to Venezuela, except these flights were not headed to Venezuela, and that was the difference.
It's a great report, WashingtonPost.com. Also details an interesting struggle between Rick Grinnell and Marco Rubio and how to handle Venezuela, which is going to be a subplot we continue to follow undoubtedly. Sylvia Foster-Frau, great to see you. Thanks to you and your colleagues at the Post. Congrats on the Pulitzers today, also at the Post down the street here. Coming up, the Trump administration is not simply looking to deport all migrants living unlawfully in the U.S. back to their home countries. A closer look at the many nations across the world the U.S. is currently working to reach deportation deals with. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The judge overseeing the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia has ordered the Justice Department to respond to all outstanding requests from his attorneys no later than today. So we'll be watching for developments in that case. Our own Major Garrett sat down with Arizona Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego this weekend to discuss that case of the mistakenly deported Maryland man and the future of American immigration policy. Here's some of their conversation.
Let me talk to you about immigration. Do you have any...
Arizona? No, never heard of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Do you have any thoughts on Kilmar Abrego Garcia?
Well, look, I think everyone that is here in this country, they need to go through a due process, whether they've come legally or they've violated the law, or through the process that Kilmar is. My opposition to anyone being deported is that, again, we have to make sure that we're deporting the right people, and that they've had the opportunity to be in front of a judge.
And when the administration labels Kilmar Abrego Garcia alternately as a wife beater, a terrorist, a gangbanger, you say,
go to the judge, prove that, and if that's the case, get him out of here.
But prove it.
Well, that's what we do for everything, right? You know, look, every person.
How would you evaluate their efforts to do that thus far?
I think, in general, what we've seen across the board is that this administration is skipping due process in order to just get bigger numbers.
Are you hearing from your constituents that they're noticing crossings are down and that their lives are better?
We do hear that crossings are down. Now, the other concerns they have is trade. They do see trade going down. These are communities that make a lot of money from border trade, from Mexican nationals legally crossing the border every day to go shopping, buy goods, go back. There's also a lot of concern about people being deported that should not be deported.
Being swept up.
Being swept up, exactly.
So you're hearing that from your community?
Yeah, we're hearing that from people in the business community, especially, farming community, the home building community. And what they're saying is they understand that there's a problem, but what they would want is a solution that gives these people an opportunity to stay here if they have no criminal record, if they're going to pay a fine, not willing, they have to pay a fine, and that at least they're here for a couple years and they're not here permanently.
Is what you're hearing cutting into the political support for the president in Arizona? Any buyer's remorse?
So I would say the biggest buyer's remorse is happening with Latino supporters. What I saw this last election, for example, Latino male voters voted for me and for Donald Trump. I think because he and I had some alignment when it comes to border policy, I've been able to hold that support, and a lot of these Latino male voters are saying to me, this is not what we voted for. We wanted border security. We did want deportations of bad people, gangbangers, things of that nature. But we didn't want, the mom to be deported from their child, right? And so that's where largely the buyer.
Or even the mom and the citizen child together, because the administration says, well, we're going to keep them together. Yeah. That's a mom's choice.
Exactly. And the other area, by the way, is business. A lot of businessmen and women are concerned about the economy. We are a border state. We're a richer state because of border trade. And some of the decisions the president has made is costing us jobs already.
Philosophically, what do you think the Democratic Party needs to do in this moment?
Well, look, I think we can't just be the never Trumpers. I think we can't just be the opposition. And I think it's important that we are that. But we also need to lay out our positions that people understand where the Democratic Party is when it comes to economics, when it comes to trade, when it comes to national security, when it comes to border policy.
From a perception point of view, writ large, does the Democratic Party have a weakness problem?
I think we have a problem that we look out of touch sometimes. And
out of touch economically, out of touch culturally, I
think of the trifecta, unfortunately. And I think, we need to align, our real base of voters with where we are politically. Because a lot of times we're really trying to answer to the most extreme version of our party versus where your normal Democrat is. Your normal Democrat is someone that believes in safe streets, safe schools, and a secure border.
What's a Trump Gallego voter sound like? And what do they tell you?
So most Trump Gallego voters are actually apolitical in general.
Okay.
They're not very they're not political nerds, and actually most Americans aren't, right?
Thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully, yeah. They're very much about security, economic security, personal family security, border security. They think of themselves as moderates, and if you talk to them, they are very moderate in a lot of positions, but maybe they're a little extreme here and a little extreme there. But they're overall fairly open-minded, and they are willing to give people a shot. I think the Trump Gallego voter last year gave me a shot, and if I don't, perform, they won't necessarily vote for me again. But they're not, I think, as close-minded as people think they are.
As maybe some Democrats think they are.
Yes, as some Democrats think they are, or even some Republicans think they are.
I mean, the message to your party, I'm guessing, is
don't be afraid to talk to them.
Our thanks to Senator Gallego. We'll have more of Major's interviews from the Sedona Forum throughout the week. Another day, another lawsuit against the Trump administration's cuts. Why a coalition of attorneys general want layoffs at the nation's public health agencies reversed. We'll have that next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. 20 attorneys general are suing the Trump administration over cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services. They claim the agency's been gutted of key health programs. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. laid off thousands of workers and did a major restructuring back in March. The AGs want a federal judge to undo all of this. Alex Tin joins us now. He tracks HHS and public health in general for CBS News. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
So what exactly are the AGs now warning has happened? And why is it that they want these cuts reversed?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, when you read this court filing that they put in, a lot of this is stuff that we've been covering already for a couple weeks, months now. All of the details of all the layoffs that have happened at HHS. But some of the new information we learned in these court filings were the impact that it's having on states. Take one example. The CDC laid off its lab for testing sexually transmitted diseases. Without that lab, all of the states in the country now only have one other lab to rely on. That's a lab in New York State, run by the state. They're trying to do their best that they can, but they say in the court filing, they just aren't staffed to essentially fill in for the CDC.
So that's one example, but conceivably then you're seeing this all across the country, that health data is being delayed, the scope of potential diseases or viruses can't be tracked in real time.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you read through that, I think it's more than 100 pages in that court filing. It's just example after example of all these different impacts all across the department that are impacting states, and they say, are unlawful, unconstitutional, and should be stopped.
And we should point out these are all Democratic attorneys general in predominantly Democratic-controlled states, and we saw this during Trump 1.0, that they'd all band together and sue. But in this case, trying to get some of that information out there and then ideally get some of this reversed, which may or may not happen.
Yeah, exactly. And, to be clear, we have heard already from the department they are trying to roll back some layoffs, but at the same time, they're doing layoffs elsewhere in the department to compensate, they say, for those layoffs.
And what was RFK Jr.'s reasoning for the restructuring? Is it DOGE or was it something else?
Yeah, I mean, look, to be clear, they have said that most of this is from DOGE, right? It's essentially instructions to meet certain quotas, to meet certain, eliminations they had to do all across the department. But of course, at the same time, while DOGE is doing some of it, it's at the end of the day, Kennedy's department, Kennedy's aides who have been implementing the plans, deciding what to cut, deciding what to eliminate, and of course, now starting to try to roll back some of what they say are mistakes.
Are they rolling it back because they realized that those they fired are actually essential to dealing with some pretty urgent public health emergencies, or is it a legal concern that they have about getting some of these people out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of both, right? I mean, some of it, yes, it's about, health emergencies. For example, you heard the FDA commissioner say he didn't realize that there were actually food and drug safety labs that were investigating outbreaks, doing testing to save Americans' lives that were laid off as part of the cuts. But then at the other hand, you're hearing stuff like, Senator Capito saying that she had to call the White House to say, I don't want this mining research health agency, please bring them back to work. So yes, it's a mix of both. Some of it is them realizing, whoops, we didn't mean to do this. Some of this is the result of pressure from some of Kennedy and President Trump's allies.
And conceivably, some seasonal thing is going to happen over the summer that makes them realize, oops, we let those people go too, and we probably shouldn't have done that. Let's see if we can claw them back.
Well, yeah, and and again, to be clear, we have heard them say that they want to bring them back. That hasn't actually happened yet, at least not that we're aware.
And whether the employees actually want to come back, having been laid off, is another thing. Alex Tin, thanks as always. Good to see you. Before we go, there's even more good news for football fans here in the Washington area, because our nation's capital will be home to the 2027 NFL Draft. The three-day event has become a spectacle in recent years. In fact, you could say the definition of a spectacle. Last month's draft in Green Bay drew more than 600,000 fans. In 2027, player selections will be held on the National Mall. Look at these renderings the NFL released today. That's what it's going to look like on the mall. They're suggesting maybe 1 million people will show up to figure out who's going to be playing for which teams. Here, earlier today, was President Trump alongside NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell making the announcement.
Boosting local businesses and bringing jobs and tourism to the heart of our capital. The draft is a celebration of one of our country's most cherished cultural institutions and the annual highlights for football fans everywhere. Everyone in the world is going to be watching.
Goes to Pittsburgh next year, then comes here to D.C. We are looking forward to that. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. in the East, 2 in the West. The Daily Report is coming up next on CBS News 24/7.